Governor Pataki did a terrific job. I think he brought out some terrific questions on his own, and I was really impressed with the questions that were coming in on the cards as well. No surprise, obviously, John Lochner, Peter Darby, GM and PG&E, both members of EDTA's Board of Directors. Let's give the last panel one more hand of applause. So for those of you that don't know, the Electric Drive Transportation Association is located in Washington, D.C. We're a member-based organization, and our primary function is Washington policy, federal policy advocacy. So that word keeps wanting to creep back in here. But candidly, I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk about the business part of plugging in, because at the end of the day, if policy doesn't connect up with what's going to make good commercial sense and what's going to be economically sustainable, then we're not going to get to the place where we all want to be and realize the true potential of this technology. EDTA is made up of vehicle manufacturers and utility companies. In fact, we have a tradition at EDTA of having co-chairs on the board of directors from each of those segments. So I'm well familiar with the cooperation between these two industries. And I want to go back to what David Cole started us out with in terms of the significance of that cooperation, bearing in mind the fact that the vehicle manufacturers and the utility industry have not always been of one mind, or shall we say cooperative, in the world of emissions reduction. There's been an awful lot of mobile sources pointing at central sources and back and forth, and some good tugging and hauling that's gone on over the years in the world of emissions. The significance, I think, today of what we're talking about is those two industries, and it's not a new phenomenon. We've been working at this for 20 years in EDTA, but right now you're beginning to see two industries of huge significance for our economy and our well-being going forward, working together to bring a solution to the marketplace. And as Governor Pataki noted, it's not just those two industries, it's also the component manufacturers, et cetera. I didn't realize, we've been talking about the price of batteries, and we're going to get into that, I'm sure, in the next panel. But the cost of an inverter in an electric drive system can be as high as 20, 25, 30%. So taking cost out of inverters and motors and things like that, the kinds of work that's being done here in Michigan and in Indiana, this is really the cradle of much of that work. Back to the significance, and this is a point that I hope will come out during this discussion, but I know we have media here in the audience. Can I just see a show of hands? How many people from the media? I get asked questions a lot about, well, what's different about the movie this time around? Because we've been talking about the electrification of transportation for some time now, and there have been spikes of great interest in this. One of the things that's clear in Washington, we make it very clear that we need many different solutions to the challenges that we've got around energy security, around greenhouse gas emissions. It's not just about electricity in terms of transportation. But one of the things that absolutely has to happen for us to get to mainstream with this technology is the fuel source, to get to sustainable transportation, is the fuel source and the vehicle sources need to be moving forward in parallel with one another. And that is exceedingly difficult to do, as we saw in some of the responses on the last panel. There are very few business models that I've been able to uncover, if any, that suggest that we should change our entire grid in order to accommodate transportation. It's a good idea, but how do you make that economically sustainable? The interesting thing to me is that what's happening today is that the fuel source is moving forward and becoming I should say the grid is moving forward, becoming a better fuel source for transportation, independent of what's happening on the vehicle side. And vehicles, as John Lochner noted, are electrifying. That process has been underway for some time now. It's almost inexorable in order to create a more efficient vehicle that we will continue to electrify, because electricity is better. The electric motor has always been more efficient. but electric power steering, et cetera, all these different systems in the vehicle continue to move forward. And in parallel, what we discover, particularly on the grid side, when we look at leveraging intermittent renewables in particular, is that we run into the same problem as we do on the vehicle side, which is energy storage. And to me, the most heartening thing that we're seeing today is that we have these two trends moving forward essentially independent of one another, and as they begin to converge, particularly as we begin to build out larger and larger capabilities to store energy using batteries, energy storage on four wheels, as I call it, and to build the manufacturing scale that we need by, in some instances, creating stationary storage for the grid in order to accommodate intermittent renewables. We will get to the price points that make us truly competitive with what is arguably a very robust technology and a very entrenched fuel system. So I wanted to set that stage. That's a little bit of me getting on a soapbox, but that to me is the true significance of what's happening here. These two segments are working together, and we're pulling forward this issue of energy storage. And in Washington, I can tell you that greater and greater amounts of money are flowing into this, not just on the R&D side, but as you know, on the manufacturing side, on the demonstration and deployment side, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that should be very supportive of what is going to happen on the business side, but we need to have that dynamic loop, as it were, so that we're learning from what's happening as we actually encounter the customer and we find out how this is landing in the marketplace. Our next panel is really, I think, a terrific panel. I'd like to take credit for putting it together, and I cannot, but we have a representative of the fuel side. We have a representative from the battery storage side. We have someone here who's bringing an entirely new business model to this game, and we have a representative from the military side. We're going to talk a little bit about dual use and about what fleet operators need, which is enormous. We have a tendency to focus on consumers because we're all consumers and we're all thinking about our next trip to the dealership. But in many respects, to get to true volume, we also need to be talking about fleet operators, and there's a huge opportunity there. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, all four of them, and then I'm going to ask them to take a few minutes to say some words, and then we'll get into questions and answers. I've got a whole bunch of them because they're great panelists, but I know you have some as well, so by all means start writing them down on the cards and having them coming forward. David Joos is President and Chief Executive Officer of CMS Energy, and he is also the CEO of its principal subsidiary, Consumers Energy. So he will be able to speak to, as I said, the fuel side of this, and we have many, many interesting elements of that which have already come up, and I'm sure he's going to illuminate his views on that. David Vieau, a good friend, is President and Chief Executive Officer of A123 Systems. Congratulations, David, on your recent IPO. And for those of you who are concerned, David did not lose an arm wrestling match with David Joos as to who was going to go first. I'm reliably informed he's just finally getting around to dealing with the damage that he did throwing too many sliders as an early pitcher earlier in his pitching career. Michael Granoff is head of oil independence policies at Better Place. He is one of the, I think, the first investor actually in Better Place. Is that correct, Michael? So congratulations on that. Very interesting business model. We're going to be hearing about that because there are other organizations that are coming to the fuel side to try and respond to what we think consumers are going to need. And Paul Skalny, who's the director of the National Automotive Center, which is part of TARDEC, Tank Automotive Research, Development and Engineering Center. And Paul I've known for several years now. He's played a key role in helping to develop user requirements, particularly on the medium and the heavy duty side, and dual use is a really important element. How can we utilize some of the research and development that's going on to support military applications on the commercial side? So let me begin. I'm going to turn the mic over to David Joos. David, you can stay there or you can come up. It's your choice. Please give a nice warm welcome for David Joos.